Okay, in this video we're going to focus on how to define a site in Dreamweaver and some basic folder/file management issues. This video I'm redoing, so you'll notice that it's a little different background from the videos that are going to follow, but I found that we really needed to focus a little more on the importance of folder management and file management and really thinking about how you structure your website. So one of the things with Dreamweaver, web development in general, is you really want to, especially when you're FTPing things up to a web server, you want to make sure that you pick a place to store your documents, your HTML files and your images on your computer, and really stick to that location, because when you start moving things around, you'll notice you have problems. So in this case, I'm going to put everything in my documents in a folder called My Websites, and I'm going to create a new folder called Ure, and I'm going to put everything in there. So I'm going to go within Ure, and I'm going to create a folder for First Web. And it's really important to avoid using spaces or uppercase letters when you're naming either your folders or your images, anything with web development. You want to keep lowercase, and you really want to avoid any spaces. So I'm going to call this Second Web. I'm going to create a new one called Third Web. Then I'm going to actually create one called Design Prototype. If you really wanted to have that illusion or that feel of a space, you just simply put an underscore in between, something like that. But for me, I tend to go for as short as possible file names that are still meaningful, so because that ends up being part of the URL. And so I'm going to avoid that functional prototype. And then I'm going to add one for the final EdWeb. Alright, so now I have a place to put everything. So really preparing for the second website and beyond, within every folder I try to create a folder for images. And I tend to call it images, not image. It's a little too fast. And then I tend to also create a folder for CSS. Now in this case, the second website, I'm not going to use CSS, but typically when I start a site, more often I tend to use CSS, and rather than creating it later, I just go ahead and create it up front. I've seen people with bigger sites also create folders for PDFs and other things, and so there's a lot of different folders you could create within it, but for now I always stick with images and CSS. So now that I've had basically on my computer where I want everything set up, I then need to go into Dreamweaver and I need to define a site. And I actually recommend defining a site for each one of the activities in this course, or when you're thinking beyond this, for every EdWeb or website that you create. So once Dreamweaver is open, I go to Site and then New Site. And I'm using CS4. I assume that CS5 is going to be similar, but I don't know. By default on the site definition, you're probably going to see the Basic tab. I tend to click the Advanced, and I'm going to call this Second Web. In my root folder, I'm going to, so starting within Ure, I find Second Web, and that's what I want. So I'm going to hit Select. Now I tend to check because sometimes for whatever reason it gets it wrong, so I'm going to add it here. And then I'm going to find my images for my default folder and hit Select. Check that, and that looks right. I can compare. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to hit OK. Actually, that should be images. So that's my default. I'm going to hit Remote. I'm going to go to FTP. And just put in the oops. Alright. So now I have to make sure I hit Secure FTP, and I can test it to see if it's right. Everything looked good. If you get an error at this point, sometimes it's tied to your password or you don't have Secure FTP. Those are the two most common problems. So I'm going to hit OK. I can see over here it's showing up. If it's not, you might have under your Windows, you might not have file selected. But I can see that that looks right. I'm going to I like to hit Expand. I'm going to connect. And what I want is I actually want to have just one folder over here that everything's in for my second web. So for each website, I tend to then go into Array and I create a folder. I'm going to call this second web. And then I collapse and I go back to sites and I edit my site. So I'm going to hit manage and I'm going to edit this because now that I've created a directory just to put everything in called second web, I want to add that to this. So I'm going to hit OK. So now when I connect and I expand, I can see that if I actually take these two things, and I hit this put, that means upload, I can see it looks one-to-one, and so it looks exactly the way I would expect to see it. So now I'm going to disconnect this, and I'm just going to show you one other way, and we're going to create one more site just to kind of illustrate the point. So I'm going to create a new site, and we call this third web, and I'm going to browse. Here it is, select. I'm going to check to see if it got it right. For some reason, I don't know if this is a Windows 7 thing or not, but it tends to not be getting it exactly right. So I'm just double checking and putting in my stuff. Then I'm going to hit remote. Then I hit secure FTP, I test it. It says I'm successful, I hit OK. So once again, I expand it, I connect, and then I create a new folder called third web. And then I collapse, and I go back and I edit. Now, when I do this, I should only have to do this once on my computer. Now, if I later want to connect to another computer, I'd have to go through some of these same steps again and define the site. But once I have it set up like this, I'm good to go. So now, if I connect, I can see this is my third website. I'm going to put, and I would see any HTML files if I had them in this case, but I can equally then go to my second website, connect, and see what it looks like. And so that's what I like to see. Rather than seeing all of my URA files, it's a one-to-one, and to me that just makes sense. So now that I've set up my site, I'm ready to go. And so I make sure I have second web selected if that's what I'm working on. I cancel, and then I can create my new page, and we'll cover this in the next video. But when I save it, I want to make sure I save it into this site. So let's just do the final test. Save it. I'm going to hit put. Dependent says yes. So now when I go to look at my remote view, I can then see that there's my index, and it's one-to-one. So if you're ever having problems with file management, it's good to take a screenshot of this view so I can see exactly what is perhaps going wrong. So that's how easy it is to set up your file structure in Dream or on your desktop, and then have it correspond to the file structure in your array by defining sites for each activity you're going to do in the course. Thanks.